This episode is brought to you by my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. Learn fertility awareness from the comfort of your own home at your own pace for a fraction of the cost. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. This episode is brought to you by my very first book, The Fifth Vital Sign: Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. The Fifth Vital Sign is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats on Amazon.com. Listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free when you sign up for a 30-day trial with Audible. Visit fertilityfriday.com/audible for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/audible. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 265. Welcome to the 265th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. And I'm excited to share today's interview with you because in today's interview, we are delving into a topic that I have not yet talked about on the show. And as this is our 5th year of podcasting, if you're listening to this in real time, this would be at the end of this year, we'll make 5 years of the Fertility Friday podcast. It's getting more and more rare that there are topics that we haven't even touched on at all, really, in the show. And so in today's episode, I share my interview with Sara Holland, and she talks to us about the emotional freedom technique, EFT tapping. So some of you may have heard of it in relation to a lot of different things, stress management. But in today's episode, we are talking about the use of EFT specifically for fertility as it does pertain to stress management and how it can be a useful tool, especially if you've been struggling with fertility challenges. So really excited to share this interview about EFT as it is something really, really interesting. It kind of goes against a lot of the things that we've learned about managing our emotions and stress. You know, being a child of the 80s and 90s, I grew up thinking that in order to get over emotional traumas or, challenging life situations, you really have to, delve in and talk through them and think about them. But EFT presents a completely different option where you address these issues in a completely different way. So it kind of flies in the face of a lot of the things that we've been told about how to manage those stressful emotions and feelings and experiences. So I hope that you enjoy my interview with Sara. And today's episode is brought to you by my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. This program is the most comprehensive fertility awareness self-study program available. And the best part is that you can learn at your own pace in your own living room for a fraction of the cost of one of my live coaching programs. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. Now, without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. And I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Sara Holland, to the show. Sara is a fertility EFT coach and the founder of Fertile Mindset, where she offers nurturing and transformative fertility support using the powerful technique EFT. And that's the emotional freedom technique for anyone who's never heard of EFT. With 18 years experience working with fertility, she has helped thousands negotiate the emotional roller coaster of fertility issues. She believes it's possible for anyone to transform their fertility journey into a much more positive experience, and that for many, healing the emotional aspects are key to resolving their fertility issues. Many of Sara's clients have told her that the results they've achieved with her support and EFT feel like magic. And having experienced her own fertility challenges, Sara is now a mom to 2 amazing boys through both birth and adoption. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about EFT and fertility. And just to mention, I discovered Sara's work through one of my listeners who reached out to me. And it was probably more than one because I typically start reaching out to people when I get a few people asking me. But it was actually one of my listeners who drew me to Sara's work. So thank you so much for being here today, Sara.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you to those listeners out there who suggested me.
Well, and I mean, as we kind of were talking about this in the pre-chat, I mean, I'm focused on all of this tangible stuff, right? Like cervical mucus and basal body temperature and when are you ovulating? But I always try to really incorporate the mindfulness pieces of it because one of the great things about charting is that you have this physical record of how the emotional stuff like stress and different things in your life is actually affecting you on a physical level. So that my clients find when they're charting is all of a sudden it's like if they were having a situation that was causing them stress, whether it be chronic or in a specific situation, all of a sudden they have this physical evidence. And then that kind of prompts them to look more deeply into how to fix it. And EFT is not something that we've ever talked about on the show. And so I'm really excited to delve into it. And before we do, I just want to get a sense of what drew you into this work, into this particular field, and also with the focus on fertility.
Well, I've been through my own fertility journey and I have my 2 children now after quite a long journey. And most people think that that is why I work in fertility. And it probably, to be honest, is the reason why I've really stuck with this. And it's become a real passion and my life to offer fertility support. But actually, it started way back before actually I even decided I wanted to have children. So I remember have children. I literally had this plan ahead that I did not want to have children. It felt way too scary to go through childbirth. It just felt very strange. My own entry into the world was very dramatic. Both my mother and myself almost lost our lives. So to me, it meant, that's too scary to go down that route. And I never thought I would have children. However, I started my work as a therapist. I was working as a reflexologist initially, working through the feet. Loved it, wonderful therapy. And the majority of the women who were coming to see me were either trying to get pregnant or were already pregnant. So I was suddenly in this world of fertility and pregnancy that I had no experience of, no particular interest in at that time, personally at least, but very quickly learning a lot about fertility issues, fertility testing, diagnosis, IVF treatment, fertility charting, everything. I went into the world and learning very quickly. Around about that time, I learned the technique EFT as well. I think my clients needed a lot more than the support I could give them through reflexology. I was fascinated by the mindset side because I could see how that was a big obstacle to them making real progress when they were so overwhelmed and so stressed all the time. So I was open and curious to find a way that I could support these clients emotionally, and EFT fell into my lap and it was like, oh, this is an interesting technique and we'll talk more about that soon. And I started using it on myself, first of all, to find out, how does this work? Is it effective? I own phobia of public speaking, first of all. So that was my first experience of using EFT. It worked instantly. Within 20 minutes of the first session, the majority of my phobia had gone completely, never to return. It was so severe, that phobia, I wouldn't have even been doing this interview. I could not speak to any kind of crowd, even if it was one on the end of a podcast. It would just be too terrifying. So that convinced me of this technique's amazing ability. And
Sorry,
then as soon
can I ask you there?
Yeah.
Because I want to just hear a little bit more about that.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind, just because now I'm curious. Now I want to know. But mind just not just taking a couple of minutes, what that was like for you. You went to and you said 20 minutes, so I definitely want to hear what happened in those 20 minutes.
Yeah, because I can't just brush over that. It was so dramatic, to be honest. And going back a little bit, I'd heard about EFT a lot. It was the new hot technique. Everybody was talking about it. There were lots of training courses. This was back in around 2003. And I thought it sounded too good to be true. It was like, fears and phobias and anxiety can be resolved within minutes. And I thought, really, points on the face and the upper body and the hands, really, you can resolve emotion, deep-seated, long-term emotional problems. How is that possible? And I honestly thought it was some kind of scam, and I just didn't believe it to be true. So my opportunity to try it was through someone who had just completed their training, and they were looking to gather case studies and look to gain their experience, and if possible, to get testimonials and success stories as well, right at the start of his business. So I thought, well, I have nothing to lose by trying it and finding out for sure what this crazy sounding technique really is about. So I did it with a completely skeptical mind, and he was specifically asking for people with fears and phobias. And I thought, yep, I have a long list of those. Let me take one to him and see what he can do with it. And it was the fear of publishing that was most urgent because I had a meeting to chair. I was a reflexologist. I ran a group of reflexologists, a support group, business group, and my turn to chair the meeting. And I was terrified. I was literally dreading it. It was, the worst thing possible.
And what would happen when you were, because I believe it or not, I had a moment where I was a little bit scared, but it's because I had this horrible experience where I was put up in front of, I was made to be the MC of a friend's wedding, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I wasn't sufficiently prepared, and it was wrong culture. I didn't understand, it was everything wrong, and it was horrible, and I felt embarrassed because I didn't feel like I did a very good job. So curious, just I want to get a sense of how did you feel? What were, the thought of going and chairing this meeting, like what would have happened without the EFT?
Probably similar to you in that I'd had this lifelong, experience of having really uncomfortable times, mainly through school and college, of like, you have to do this presentation in front of the class, or you have to do this, and making myself do it, knowing that I was doing a bad job, my voice wasn't loud enough, being criticized, that it wasn't good enough, and just shrinking back into myself. So once I became an adult and I could make my own decisions, my decision was I will never do anything like that ever again. I would keep myself safe, and I'd set up my business, and obviously giving talks is a great way to promote yourself, but I refused to. And I would often be asked, come and speak to our local women's group about reflexology. We'd love to have you. And I would say, no, sorry, I don't give talks. It was just a definite no, I don't do this. Just self-preservation. I would just freeze, and it would feel like the most uncomfortable thing to do. So having this meeting coming up, which I had to do, and it was a relatively safe group of friends, people knew, but it still felt terrifying. But I'd kind of told myself I was going to do it. And then this opportunity to try EFT came at the same time. And I thought, let's give it a go. It's got nothing to lose by trying it. And I'd booked in 2 sessions to have 2 sessions. And I thought, well, what can you do in 2 sessions as well? That's nothing. So I had the first one. And it was, as I said, within the first 20 minutes of that session that I felt all the fear just drop away. And actually, I felt myself even want to go back and redo the talks that I'd done in school and college, and think I could do such a better job if I wasn't nervous. I could confidently get my message across. Oh, wish I could go back and do it differently. I had that total mindset shift with it. And we completed the hour to prepare myself for this meeting. And I did the meeting. I was very happy to do it. Part of the meeting, though, however, was teaching a technique. It's like, I have this reflexology technique that I've learned, and I want to teach you. And so I did that. However, in the group, it was a very mixed group, and I was only in my mid-20s at that stage, one of the younger kind of members there. And there were some women there who were been practicing for decades, and they were, say, in their 40s, 50s. And I was aware that one woman in the audience was rolling her eyes and shaking her head as I was teaching the technique.
Exactly what you want when you have a fear of public speaking.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought, oh gosh, she's heard this all before and it's not new to her. And I just shrunk into myself again. And I felt criticized, and I felt not good enough. So I went back to my EFT practitioner at my second session. I said, it was all going great. I actually enjoyed it, apart from this moment when I was getting eye rolls and shaking a head. And so he said, right, let's work on that then specifically. Like, what other people are thinking about me? Will they think I'm, rubbish, that I don't have a good message? Because we hadn't addressed that in the first session. It was more about my voice and, can I actually stand up there without shaking? It was all about me. This time it was about the audience. And so we did that, and I felt better. And since then, I've never tapped on it again. I've never had to use any more EFT, and I have taken so many speaking opportunities. My most recent one was being live on BBC News, so live morning television, the biggest TV channel. Wow. With not knowing what they were going to ask me, just an interview without prepared questions. And I got myself early to the studio in London, and I thought, right, I'm going to definitely need to tap for this, because this is big. This is the biggest thing, live TV. And I stood in the ladies, like, ready to tap. And I was like, actually, I feel fine. I don't need to. And this is 15 years after that only time that I'd worked on it. So again, it reaffirmed to me, this is an amazing technique that really frees you of anything that you don't need. And in the long term, because why would I need to be scared of public speaking? It's not a threat to my life. It's not any real danger. It's just something that was programmed in childhood that felt scary. But actually now, as an adult, looking at it rationally, there is no need to be afraid. It's actually something to be excited about, because you can get your message out and you can speak to people and make connections. So, which is why I'm here chatting to you.
Well, thank you for taking us through that. I always like to kind of contextualize and get that image in my mind to make it more tangible. And I think one of the things that fascinates me about EFT, I mean, I went to university, I took psychology classes, I learned about the theories, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, and there's this kind of idea that in order to get over fears and in order to address even emotions that you have, tendencies that you have, there's this idea that there has to be this like long, emotionally draining, like you have to go through all this stuff, you have to kind of tear open all the wounds and go into all this stuff. And EFT, like you said, does sound a little bit fanciful, if that's a nice way to say it, because for anyone who isn't familiar with it, it literally involves like tapping pressure points. So there's no like talk therapy. I don't know. So maybe share with us like what is EFT? Let's demystify that, what it kind of looks like, what the process is like, and then how is it even possible that something that is so different to what we think about is necessary to address? How could it even work? Especially like, I mean, your example is not fertility related, but anyone who hears that example can realize like, well, if it can do that, like what's it doing? And what are the implications for fertility?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, really interesting. You talked about like the traditional psychology model and how we're used to this long-term drawn out therapy that can feel very painful to go through as well to get to the result that you want. And EFT really, it often is called energy psychology. So it is a combination of Western psychology alongside the energy side of it, which is the Eastern side using the Chinese meridians, and it brings the two together. So whilst it isn't just talk therapy, there are elements of that as well. So I'll try and make it clear how it works. So the whole theory behind EFT and why it does work is that the cause of all negative emotions is a disruption in our body's energy system. So the cause of all negative emotions, when we talk about negative emotions, it's anything that we don't need, that isn't serving us, that isn't beneficial, that we may have held on to for longer than we need to. So whether that is, intense sadness or frustration or anger or fear, as in my case with the public speaking, anxiety, there's a lot of emotional states that we get stuck in that we understand why they started maybe, but we don't understand why we've stayed stuck with it, and it's not helping us, and we can't just talk ourselves out of it. It's something that's kind of hardwired into us, it feels like, for a reason. So the theory with EFT is that the cause of that emotional state is obviously the trauma or the event that we went through, but what is keeping it stuck is a disruption in our energy system. And the energy system that we work with is the Chinese meridian system. So going right around the world to China, where it's got 5,000 years plus of history. This is an ancient system and ancient knowledge there, but that we in the West are quite uninformed about, really. But what happened was in the 1970s, I think the mid-1970s, it was a Californian psychologist called Dr. Roger Callahan. He was working with traditional psychology techniques like you described there, but he had an interest in Chinese medicine. And that was, something that he had a great interest in and was always in the back of his mind. Now, as the story goes, because it does go back a few decades now, but it's this retold story about how EFT or tapping techniques as a whole were created. He had a client one day called Mary who had a phobia of her own. It was a very intense water phobia. And it caused her a great deal of problems. Even just washing her face and being around water would cause so much anxiety. She was really, really upset by it. And he'd been working with her for months with traditional psychological techniques and wasn't getting anywhere at all. And then in this one particular day, she mentioned that when she thought of water, it made her feel sick to her stomach. And he knew that the stomach meridian point was just under the eye. So just on the eye socket bone under the eye, under both eyes. So he said to her, well, let's experiment. Think about water. Feel that sick feeling to your stomach and just use your own fingertip to tap under the eye. So that's what she did just for a couple of minutes. And apparently her water phobia just dissolved completely. She said she didn't feel any anxiety anymore. Being California, quite different to here in the UK, but he had a swimming pool in the grounds of his clinic. So they went out to the swimming pool and she splashed her face. And there was no anxiety. So he then went on from that moment, that discovery of combining psychology with the tapping on meridians, which hadn't been done before, to developing the first tapping therapy, which then later developed into EFT that we use today. So yeah, it was that, how it takes one person, doesn't it, to make that connection, that we are rebalancing with the tapping on the major meridian points. We're rebalancing, sending an impulse down each of the major meridian lines to rebalance our whole inner energy system. And still in the West, majority of people will not comprehend the meridian system in any way. They'll say, well, there must be something else going on with the tapping. It's quite hard for us to understand that. Whereas in China, it's just totally accepted. Acupuncture is used in all the major hospitals. It's just normal. So I like to kind of think of it in a slightly different way. I think of our Chinese meridian system a bit like our body's inner electrical wiring system. Many of us understand about that energy, and we sense that we do have energy as well as everything physical that we can see in our body. So our meridian system is like our body's electrical wiring system to help our energy flow throughout our body, just as wires in our house help electricity flow, to keep our lights on and keep everything working. We have our energy flow system to keep us healthy in our mind and our body. Now, if there is a disruption going on, then that's like a power surge or a short circuit in our body's electrics, if you like. So by tapping on the endpoints when that disruption is going on, we're sending an impulse through the whole system, rebalancing it so that we get back to our natural energetic state, which then leads to our natural emotional state. So emotional freedom techniques, it helps us be free of what we didn't need and instead connect to our most healthy, natural emotional state, to look at things rationally, logically, to be solution focused rather than problem focused, to be able to connect to our inner strength and resilience and natural optimism, all really useful mindsets and qualities to take on, especially when you're on a fertility journey. So it is fascinating to see how it works. Talk therapy part that you mentioned, and about how painful and uncomfortable that can be, obviously not always, but it can be to go through. There are elements of that brought into EFT because we do use it very therapeutically as well, but in a much cleaner and quicker way. In that, for example, like I said about my fear of public speaking, I could have said, well, that started when I was 5 years old, when I had to speak in front of the school, and the teacher said, oh, sit down, you're messing this up. And they told me off in front of everybody. And I was so ashamed of myself. And thinking about that was a trauma, and either you can go back and talk through that trauma and try and rationalize it now as an adult, or with EFT, you can revisit that memory. You can feel the discomfort still now, the embarrassment, the shame of that trauma today as an adult, and then tap on all the meridian endpoints while you're in that moment of remembering it. So you're kind of fast tracking the therapy in that way. You're thinking of that traumatic time, and then you're tapping as you remember that emotion, and you still connect with that emotion. The tapping rebalances, so you've resolved that negative connection. So it is still kind of traditional, if you like, with the traditional psychology and the revisiting whatever happened in the past to create this current state, potentially, but using the energetic technique to rebalance more quickly.
It's so fascinating to think about even just the different ways that we look at the body in different modalities. And so just to kind of reiterate, because I'm sitting with it, and it's just such an interesting concept. It's so different to the way we think about it, because then we're talking about energy as a real thing, and it's not exactly tangible, but by thinking of our body, like you said, in this meridian system that in the West we don't fully understand or necessarily accept, but thinking about our body in that way, and thinking about how you described kind of like the electrical system and specific points where the energy, you said, kind of exit points, or I'm not describing it properly, but just to have that example of like there's specific points where this kind of, that we can basically kind of adjust to this energy and yeah. So I just think it's really interesting, because when you describe it, and I've heard many people describe it, essentially you're thinking about this, painful experience, whatever it is, or at least trying to channel the feeling that you had, or potentially saying things. I know sometimes people talk about like actually saying certain things while doing it. But either way, you're trying to get yourself in this emotional state where you're feeling that uncomfortable emotion, painful emotion, fearful emotion, whatever it is, and actively kind of interacting with your energy. And somehow that frees you of that emotion. It seems too good to be true, because then you're feeling all this pain, and you're saying that we can tap on these points. And then what happens to the pain or the emotion or the discomfortable, I just made up a word, uncomfortable emotion? What happens to that? Where does it go?
Where does it go? Gosh, yeah. Well, can we see it? Does it disappear somewhere? It leaves because we don't need it. If you could just sit down and rationalize it, I have, for example, I had a client today, which is very common, someone just talking to me about a friend announcing a pregnancy. Nearly every woman that I speak to comes to me with this, and they say, a close friend announced their pregnancy, and they had been through infertility themselves. They perhaps had IVF treatment before, and now they are pregnant. And part of me wants to be happy for them and wants to be inspired by them, because it is inspiring. They got there after their struggle. But actually, the bigger part of me is insanely jealous, angry, sad, frustrated, and I can't even bear to be in the same room as them or to congratulate them. And I feel bad about it. I don't like myself for feeling that way. They've got this inner dialogue going on, which is around lots of emotional issues, isn't it? Let's be honest. It's never just black or white, is it? We have a mixture of, I feel good about it, I feel bad about it, I don't know how to think, and if we could just rationalize it and, write all the negatives in a list, write all the positives in a list, and choose to focus on the positives, then we would all do it. We would all, we'd be able to just talk ourselves into the mindset that feels best and let go of the negative. But we know that's not how we are wired as human beings. We're far too complex, with all our history and everything that we have in our brains. So a technique like EFT, because it's working on an energetic level, it's working at where it has kind of left its imprint, if you like. In that moment of feeling very jealous, we have that imprint of, negativity that is stored within our energy system, and it's disrupted. It's not flowing. It's not healthy. Whereas if we can get that flow back and we're actually in a healthy state, then our mind is healthy at the same time. So the negative emotions, negative beliefs, whatever it is, can just be released and let go of. And we just connect with our, what is actually best for us, what is healthy, comfortable, what our mind and our body want us to feel and think. You mentioned about using words when we tap, and that's right. We use reminder words and phrases and all kinds of things that we say as we're tapping on the points. For example, words like that example I just mentioned could be, I feel really jealous of my friend, while you're tapping on the point, and I wish it was me, and it feels so unfair, and I just can't bear to be in the same room as her. You're kind of just verbalizing out loud what you're already thinking. That's what the words are about. And we say the words to focus us, so the disruption's going on. So as we're tapping, we're rebalancing it. Now, a lot of people that use EFT say it feels really strange that you're just saying negative words. You're just focusing on the negatives. When do I get to say the positives and program the positive thoughts in? Because that's what I want to do. I want to, I don't want to focus on those negatives. I want to say the positives. Actually, it's not a standard part of EFT, and it's very unusually used that we bring any positive phrases in. Because what we're doing is we're focusing on the negative, we're acknowledging it, we're not hiding away from it, and then we're tapping to rebalance the reaction, and then letting our own natural positivity, or whatever that state is, to come through. Which does always happen, because, we are resilient, essentially. We have got a survival instinct, we don't want to stay stuck in a negative mindset. It's not how we can operate in our life in our best way. So we very rarely even need to say any positive words. So it's a transformation rather than just the negatives have gone somewhere. It is that transformation, that learning, that inner learning, that we don't need this anymore. Why would we hold on to it? How is it serving us? We can let go of that, and we can discover what is really underneath. What is the best way for us to deal with this? Which for me with public speaking was, wow, this is exciting. I can speak to people, and I can grow my business, and I can meet new people, and, get a message out there. It's exciting. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so, I've done tapping and usually saying phrases and things like that. And I would love to hear how you would describe how it feels like. Because I would imagine for someone, even for myself, I remember hearing about this, it's not something I've ever really focused on. And I wouldn't say it's something that I do all the time. So for instance, I meditate pretty regularly, but I wouldn't say that I necessarily, tap every day or anything like that. But I definitely have, and I definitely do, if I feel particularly uncomfortable emotion, whatever it is, like something didn't go the way I wanted it to, or, something like that. Or I've had a couple interesting experiences lately with, hiring somebody to do something, it doesn't work out, having all those feelings of why did that person take my money without doing the service type of thing. And I'm a human being too, right? I can get kind of focused on that and be in that little bit of a negativity. And what I found is you think about it, you tap, and then it's like you're kind of waiting for something to happen, but you realize it just you just don't feel that way anymore. It's the strangest thing. So I would love for you just to maybe describe that, what it actually feels like. So you're in that emotion, you feel uncomfortable, and then you tap, and then kind of what happens? Take us through that.
I can give you a few kind of little snippets, insights, because I think, like anything, the experience is different for every person, and it's different for every time you use it, because it depends what you're using it on and what the outcome is, But some typical things that I've experienced either myself or I've seen my clients experience, first of all, is that, like you say, that funny kind of, oh, what's here instead? Where am I? Because people often, they only ever come to me when it's a really important, really strong emotion, and they're just fed up of feeling that way, and they know that something has got to change. So whether that's extreme stress or anxiety or overwhelm, whatever it may be, often, it is totally tied into their fertility journey. And they're so used to feeling that very strong emotion. It's on their thoughts are on their mind all the time. They wake up feeling that way. They go to bed feeling that way. It's who they are, it's how they feel about this particular issue. Then we tap for literally a few minutes and it's gone or dramatically reduced. And there can be that little moment of, oh, what now? It kind of feels neutral. It's like, that's gone. I don't feel at all connected to it. I've got no intense jealousy or anger or whatever now. But what do I feel instead? So they have that kind of I would call it like no man's land. It's like in between the negative and the positive. It's like, what's going to come in next? And sometimes it just takes a deep breath. And I always advise to take deep breaths, sips of water as we work, as with all energy techniques. And it might just take a little bit of them verbalizing it out loud and saying, right, how do I feel now as I think about that? And then they listen to see what thoughts come forward now. And I always say, listen to the self-talk. Listen, as you say to yourself, for example, my friend is pregnant. She just announced she's pregnant and I'm not pregnant yet. And that doesn't feel fair. What are you saying to yourself? And they might say, well, I'm saying, actually, that's really inspiring. And I want to talk to her more about that. And I can't wait to see her next time, and they've just completely changed their mindset and their perspective on it, Whereas before it was like, I can't even bear to think about it and it's so unfair and I'm so angry and I don't want to feel that way and I feel, bad about myself. It was a totally different inner conversation they were having. So that is really typical, is that kind of transition from the negative to the positive through a little bit of a neutral phase. As you said in your intro, some people just say to me, wow, this is like magic. It literally feels like there's been a magic wand that's been cast over their life, because like with my fear of public speaking, I never imagined that I would ever be on national TV. It was, growing up as someone who was terrified and was the shy girl at school and would never speak up, I was never going to be on TV. It wasn't going to be my life. It was not ever there. So for that to now be reality, it does feel kind of magical. It's like, really, you get all these opportunities and new things that can happen when your mind is in the right place, when your mind is supporting you rather than holding you back. So yeah, it's very different for everybody. And there's sometimes an element of disbelief as well, because it feels so dramatic. And sometimes it just feels natural and normal as well. It's like, yeah, this is how it's meant to feel. That negative state was so uncomfortable and I could feel it physically in my body and it was making me ill and I couldn't sleep. But now it's like a total relief. It's like, this is calm and neutral and comfortable. And this is what I've been aiming for. They feel like they're coming back to themselves, rather than all the noise of everything that they've kind of collected through all their history and through other people's opinions and through listening to the media and what it says about fertility, and you should be stressed and you should be worried about your age, and they collect facts, if you like, and collect propaganda about fertility, and then they come back to themselves when they've tapped through all of that and say, actually, I'm okay, this is fine, this is my current situation, this is what I know about myself, these are the tests I'm still going to do, these are the steps I'm going to take. They're very rational again about their journey. So yeah, it's different for everyone, but it's always a beautiful thing to watch the action and that transition.
Well, and that made me think of a question, because, okay, so we have the moment, here I am, I had these emotions, I did my tapping, I did my deep breathing, I've sat with myself, and it's very interesting the way you described it, because it's literally like the negative emotion is kind of evacuating. It's like being evicted. And then you kind of it's kind of like you go back to being in your state of mind. It makes me think of like, if you have a friend or a partner, if you've ever been in an argument with, you can kind of get in this state of like, not necessarily your best self.
Yeah.
And then once you actually calm down and become centered again, then you can actually get back to like what you really want to accomplish here or something like that. Yeah. But how does that spill over? So that's in the moment, but I mean, we all have patterns and tendencies, and I know my brain has a tendency to looping back to the thing. So even though in those moments you feel like release, you feel better, but then, so tell me how you work with women about that aspect of it, because I mean, just having that tool in those moments when you're so deeply triggered on an emotional level, when you're trying to conceive and it's not happening. I mean, I've talked about that particular thing on this podcast so many times, that specific situation of like the Facebook feed, just the constant trail of babies, and like having to deal with, do I go to my best friend's baby shower? I'm so scared I'm going to be a hot mess because I'm happy for her, but I'm like in my own like state right now, right? So having that very practical thing to do, I think, is very, very helpful. And so how does it play out? So we have that situational, but over time, is it a practice that you would kind of implore whenever you're triggered, or how does it lessen the next time that you're triggered?
Yeah, I'm so pleased you've asked that, because I have people say, they use it like in the moment like that, and they say, right, I've reduced stress, I feel great. And then their next question is, am I going to be tapping all day, every day?
Yeah. Do I just have to concentrate? Do I just
Exactly.
need to just...
Yeah. And it's like, no, don't worry. There's different ways to apply tapping. One of them is that in the moment. I always think that's the emergency. I need help right now. I'm triggered. I'm stressed. People will use it in the doctor. They'll use it while they're having procedures. It's just like, I need to stay calm right now. And they use it in the moment. But there is also the deeper way of using it, the therapeutic way of using it. So yes, you use it in the moment for a particular stress response. But if that's something that's going to continue to happen, it's looking at, well, why do I respond in that way? What is it within me that means that I respond in that situation in that way? And one thing that obviously comes up time and time again when women are going through their fertility journey and they're not getting pregnant is often this: people tell me they feel a sense of failure. It's like, I haven't been able to achieve this. I've worked so hard. I've done everything I've been told. I've eaten all the right foods and I'm doing, taking all the right treatments, and I'm still not pregnant, and therefore I'm a failure. And we can tap on that, tap on the feeling of being a failure, but asking them, actually, does this show up in your life in other areas? Do you say you're a failure, and do you feel you're a failure in other areas? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. When I didn't get that promotion at work, and when I failed my exams at school, and when my first boyfriend dumped me, and and it's gone way back to like, I've always felt like if something's going wrong, it's my fault. So then we say, well, where did that come from? Why do you believe it's your fault? Your boyfriend made his own mind up, and, this fertility journey isn't, a reflection on what you're doing or not doing. It's just how it is right now. And then we go back to, well, where did they learn that being a failure was part of who they are, or that being a failure is something bad, or that being a failure even exists, And we talk about where they first heard that. And it may well have been a teacher at school or a parent when they were very young, very at that impressionable, the under 8 years old age. And when everything they're listening and taking in the world is truth, other people's opinions and other throwaway remarks that are said are taken in as a truth because they're in that really receptive age. And it may well have been, a parent saying, oh, you never do anything right, and you don't work hard enough. You're going to fail at everything if you don't work hard. And that's been taken in as, oh, right, I've really got to work hard to be, succeed and not be a failure. So whenever anything goes wrong in the future, even right up to when they're talking to me in their 40s or whenever it is, they still feel like that 5-year-old that was told, you've got to work hard, otherwise you're going to fail. So therefore, if they fail, they think they haven't worked hard enough. And like you say, it's that loop back. It's just constant. So that's where it sounds a little bit more traditional psychology, but we will go back to that 5-year-old memory, because I've always specialized in fertility, but still I get people come to me of all different ages. And I remember way back, a woman in her 80s came to me, and we dealt with a memory from when she was 3 years old. And it was still very current, and she was in tears reliving a memory that had stayed with her. So we revisited that and removed the emotional charge that she'd carried for like over 80 years. And then she could finally let that go, So it's never too late to go back and resolve where things were laid down initially, and stop that negative loop, that go back to negative beliefs about ourselves, beliefs about the world. Often it's promises that we made to ourselves. Like I said, I'm never going to stand up and give a talk to anyone else again, ever, because it's too painful. So therefore I didn't, and I believed it was painful. So yeah, it's that self-protection. That's what we're all about all the time, aren't we? Trying to keep ourselves safe. Mm-hmm. Recognize where it came from, then we can finally resolve it fully.
Well, it's so interesting because it does incorporate what we're used to, that concept of where did this come from, kind of going back in the past. And it's not always easy, not that we necessarily want to do that, and kind of thinking about it. But it's so interesting because it's also different. So with your 80-year-old client, you didn't spend 6 weeks like unpacking all of that stuff. Like you basically took enough time with her to go back to what happened and had her focus on that moment and tap.
Yeah.
So and it's so different, but similar.
Yeah, some people know exactly. They're like, I know I have this fear or this anxiety now, and I know it started then. They're very clear on their history, especially if they've been through traditional talk therapy before. They've got super clear. They know their whole history. They just don't have a way of necessarily resolving it quickly. Other people just have no idea. Majority of us, I would say, have no idea, at least at first. We just know we're in this current state. We're very focused on the pain that we're currently in, and we can't figure out where it came from. Sometimes the tapping in the current moment releases the initial kind of overwhelm, and we can think more clearly and get clear on, actually, this, I know where this came from. And other times I just ask a simple question of, feeling that emotion that you feel now, for example, sense of failure. I feel like a failure. When do you remember feeling that before? Or when is the earliest memory of feeling that sense of failure? Of course, we're not talking about a fertility journey, because you've only been in that the last couple of years or whatever, but prior to that, like going back to childhood, do you remember that feeling, that kind of feeling again? What does it remind you of? And that can often get you straight back to that moment if it can.
Well, and as it pertains to fertility, then another question that I thought of is, so, there's obviously a lot of practical implications about it. And this is one of the reasons I love talking about stress, because sometimes it can just seem so elusive, but there's very practical things that we could do. And one of the common threads is that often, whether you're, doing mindfulness practices or doing tapping, it's really bringing you back, like you said, into yourself and into the moment. And so I suppose the question then is, there's practical implications to help you to handle all the things that are happening, whether that's the triggering things that your friends are doing, like getting pregnant, or when everyone around you seems to be getting pregnant, whether it's like, comments that people say, the well-meaning, horrifying comments that people are constantly saying, just take a vacation, relax. Have you tried this diet? That kind of stuff. So in that, but, for the women who are listening who have been trying to conceive, they want to conceive. So are there also implications for that aspect of it?
In what do you mean? Sorry, I'm not sure I followed. So implications.
Implications in terms of helping conception to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole area of stress and does it or does it not impact on fertility is such a contentious topic, isn't it? And everyone has a different opinion. And even when you talk to scientists and doctors, they'll still have different opinions. And some will say very much so, it does impact, and others will say it doesn't. And there are research studies to support both sides as well. So we can't even look at the research and say definitively, stress does impact on infertility. However, as you said at the start there, when you look at charting, and how you can notice that when there is extreme stress, that our cycles will be thrown out, and it may be that there's a short luteal phase or there's no ovulation at all, and I'm sure many other things as well that you notice. And even if you go to the doctor, regardless of whether or not you're trying to conceive, but if you go to the doctor because suddenly your periods have stopped and you're not ovulating, and the first thing the doctor will say, if you're not menopausal, is, have you been through a huge amount of stress lately? Because they recognize that the impact of stress does, impact on our reproductive hormones. The stress hormone, reproductive hormones are communicating to the ovaries can shut down. We know that happens. So I think we can understand that it can definitely have an impact. However, there's other areas that I'm really fascinated in as well that I think make a lot more sense to the women who are looking at using these techniques, is the kind of tangible effect that stress or any emotional pain has on their fertility journey. That could simply be that actually it's all so overwhelming right now. It's so stressful. It's taking up every waking and sleeping thought and all my money and all my energy, and it's destroying my relationship, etc., that I don't even know if I can carry on trying to conceive. I really want that baby, but do I really want to damage other aspects of my life in pursuit of that baby, And that's the point they often come to me, is that crossroads of, what am I going to do? I want to carry on, but I can't do it to the expense of everything else. And that's when stress really does impact on a fertility journey, you could say, regardless of whether it's also impacting on hormonal balance and blood flow to the uterus and everything else, So I think there's many ways like that the stress and the overwhelm of fertility issues, and indeed life as a whole, work, money, relationship stress, everything else can impact on the fertility journey, and can impact on how successful it is and whether there is a positive outcome at the end. There can be women and couples who definitely need to have fertility treatment. Maybe there are permanently blocked fallopian tubes and the only way they can get pregnant is to have IVF. However, they are so fearful of needles and they are so stressed by the expense of IVF, and they don't want to go through it, and it's not how they imagine they conceive their baby, that they're putting off even making the appointment. And then time is ticking by, the woman's getting older, she's worried about her egg reserve, and in a way it's kind of sabotaging their chances of success because she's holding back because of the stress of it all. So there's many, gosh, I could give so many different examples, but many different ways that the mindset, the emotions, the emotional state really do have a huge impact on potentially the success of the companion. Will this person actually?
Mm-hmm. I really appreciated how you described that, because as you were talking about just the realities of it and the emotions that these women and couples are going through, it really hits you that it's kind of paraphrased. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, yes, we know that there are scientific benefits and we know that stress can impact the body, but it's a real quality of life issue when it gets to that point that it's all consuming. And what I find fascinating about EFT is that it gives you a way to kind of go there to those emotions that terrify you. So I've spoken to women about this who are kind of on their path of the fertility journey. And it's kind of like, well, I don't really want to even go to that emotion. I don't even want to go there because I'm afraid I'm just going to cry forever and I'll never be able to stop. So I just kind of like prevent myself from even going there because it's too painful. And perhaps EFT, it's like a beacon of light because you go there, but you have this tool and you can feel it. And it seems too simple to work. Just
I know, honestly, we still have the doubt there. Even when we've used it and we've seen the results, we're still like, really?
Like, really, Ollie?
I know. And you know what? As well as that kind of comfort that once you know it does work for you, you've got that comfort of I can go to that difficult issue because I know it will work for me and I'm going to be okay. And I minimal short-term pain for long-term gain kind of thing, Also, it is a wonderful technique to kind of be kind to yourself and use it flexibly. And in fact, I do this with nearly every single person that I support for their first session. I always ask them, how do you feel about starting these sessions? How do you feel about talking about these big issues that perhaps you've never spoken to anyone about? And, you feel overwhelmed by all these different emotional aspects of your fertility. And we're going to be talking about them and tapping through them. How does that feel to you to even get started? And 9 times out of 10, they go, yeah, actually, I'm really nervous or I'm really anxious or I'm worried this isn't going to work. I'm scared about verbalizing it out loud because I think I'm going to burst into tears. I'm scared about talking to a stranger that I've never spoken to about this. Lots of different aspects come up. So I always say, well, let's just start there instead. And we start and we tap on that first of all, tapping on, I'm worried about going there with these big issues. I don't even know if I want to go there. Shall I just hide it away in a box like I've been doing it already, and going through that instead. And then they say, right, okay, I feel more comfortable to start talking about it. So it's a very kind technique. It's not just going straight to the pain. And, and although, there are times when people want to do it that way and that's fine, but I believe in being kind to ourselves and taking it step. And actually that preparation work often does 50% of the work once you're there. It's like, okay, I feel okay about going to that issue. And now I'm talking about it. I feel actually a lot calmer than I thought I would already. So yeah, it's a lot. This is why I'm so passionate about it, as you can probably tell. I just love it. It's so flexible for any situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and paint us a picture. So we've been talking about it. We have a sense of it. Maybe share with us, where are these tapping points? And just briefly, I guess, just right. Because like I said, it's so simple. There's a lot of information about it now. There's videos that there's so many different people that are talking about it. And I know you're going to share some of your resources with the audience around just getting started, because I know you've put together some really great resources. But just paint us a picture, because like I said, it's so interesting. It's something that you have to experience, because if you try to think about it logically, it doesn't actually make sense.
No, I know. So that's why I always encourage, because if I hadn't taken that leap and experienced it myself, I'd be a totally different person right now. There's no doubt about it. Even to the point where the releasing the fear around public speaking made me want to release more fears and anxiety. And I mentioned at the very start, just to complete that story, that I never wanted children because of my own mother nearly dying at childbirth. And they thought I had definitely died. It was a really traumatic situation that I was told about as a young child. And as I released my anxiety through using this technique, I had this little kind of glimmer come in of, I want to be a parent. I want to be a parent, and I'm going to resolve my fear around childbirth and all the other evidence I'd collected, to make myself not want to. And I literally sat in my garden one sunny June afternoon. I remember it so well. I sat on a deck chair and I sat there and said, right, I'm just going to tap through every single reason I have not to have children. And I'm going to figure out if they're real or if they're just fears that I've collected, And by the end of that, probably about 2 hours, sitting, talking to myself, tapping, I don't know what my neighbours thought. I had a very definite, I want to be a mother. I really do. And I feel safe in making that decision. So I can't even remember now where I got to there with the question, but it has that real impact. So, and I wouldn't have gone on further to, work with it if I hadn't had that experience of it.
Wow.
So remind me, Lisa, what you just asked me, because now I've got my own story.
Well, what got you to the story was when I said, if you think about it logically, then it doesn't make sense. You have to experience it.
Yeah.
And so just paint a picture for the listeners now. So when you were in the garden, like, tell us about the points you were tapping on. And what
exactly.
That was like.
So EFT, it's in 3 stages. And as you said, I have some resources that will teach this all perfectly. It's in 3 basic stages: the preparation for doing it, and then the testing and the checking. So the preparation part is that you decide, right, this is what I want to focus on. This is the specific issue. Like for me, fear of childbirth, for example. This is how I feel about it. Blind terror is my emotion. And then how strong is that on a 0 to 10 scale? That's our preparation part. And I would have been off the scale, I'd have been, 10. So that's the preparation. That's all you have to do to start. Then you start applying EFT, where you tap on points that are on the hands, the head, the face, and the upper body. All very easy to access points. And all of these points you're tapping with your own fingertips. And they're points which are the end points of all the major meridians. So you're covering the whole meridian system by tapping on those points. And as you're tapping each of those points, you're saying words and phrases that keep you focused on the issue that you want to work on. It begins with a setup phrase on one point, where we kind of set up, this is what I want to work on. And then reminder phrases that keep us focused as we go through all the other points, from the top of the head through to under the arm. We go through like a line down the body, which again, in my resources, there's a picture, there's guidance, a video to show you all of this. And it takes literally a couple of minutes to go through what we call one round of EFT, where you do the setup phrase and then you tap on all the other points. It's I always forget how many points because I'm in the moment. About 12 points. So not many, you're just tapping through them. You're spending like 7 or 8 seconds on each one. It's not long. You're just tapping through them. Then once you've completed that one round of tapping, saying the words, tapping the points, you stop the tapping, you take a nice deep abdominal breath just to ground yourself after the tapping. Sip of water is always a good idea to stay hydrated. And then the third part, as I said, is the testing and checking part of it. And that's really important, because if we don't do that, we kind of think, I feel better and I'll get on with the rest of my day. And, we don't think actually I'm striving for a particular result, and that's what the testing and checking is about, to keep on track. And the testing is simply, right, go back to your original issue, think about it in the same way as you did at the start. So I would think about my intense fear of childbirth and think about the story my mother told me. And I know that if I give birth, I'm going to die too. It's just that story. How do I feel about it? What's the emotion? And where is it on that 0 to 10 scale? Now, sometimes the emotion changes. Sometimes it goes from anger to sadness, for example, before it finally disappears. So we need to see if there's a shift in what the actual emotion is around the issue, and then still grading it on the 0 to 10 scale. And if it's anywhere above a 0, I always say do another round. So then you start again and you go back to the tapping and you go back to the words, and then you test again. And if it's again anywhere above a 0, you do another round. It literally, each one takes a couple of minutes. So there's no reason not to just motivate yourself to do one more round. And even if you get to a 0.5 out of 10, which people do, they're like, there's just this little glimmer of frustration left or something, there's just this tiny bit. And we can kind of talk ourselves into, well, that's okay, because, this is a really serious issue I'm dealing with. Of course, I'm going to still be frustrated. 1 out of 10 or a 0.5 out of 10, it's normal. But still, I always encourage people, especially if they're working with me one-to-one, I'll say, let's just try one more round. For the sake of 2 minutes of tapping, let's just try. So we tap on that remaining bit. And we might even include some words that are like, even though I still have this little bit of frustration, I'm entitled to feel that way. And I can't imagine even letting go of it. But I wonder if I can let go of it. We're just kind of having that conversation. And then if we get to the 0, it's off. That's where the release really happens. It's like, wow, I didn't realize I could feel differently about this. I didn't realize there was another perspective I could take on. And for me, that was, wow, I'm actually excited about how I could give birth. And could it be a positive experience? Could I make something different happen? I was the biggest kind of home birth planner and, everything. I was like, and I did end up having an emergency cesarean, just like my mother, but I had a positive experience of emergency cesarean. I didn't have one regret or fear around, it was a very different experience, which I somehow believe I needed to go through, to show how cesarean can be positive as well as deeply traumatic, So So yeah, that hopefully paints a picture of what it's like step by step. And yeah, as you say, like anything like here, you only really get the true experience by trying it yourself. Even if you were to watch a video of someone else doing it, you still don't know how it feels. So it's using it yourself, being brave enough to give it a try. It really is. There's nothing to lose by learning the steps and trying it for yourself.
And I love it's like takes like 2 minutes or 5 minutes or something. That this is not
we all have
a big time investment here. Well, so I mean, we've talked about a lot, and I thank you for taking us through that. I feel like this interview is going to be really just enlightening. It allows us to think of things in a completely different way. And I love things that are practical and simple, but so deeply profound and helpful, useful, effective. So I really appreciate you taking us through this. And if the listeners could take one takeaway from what we would talk about, or something that you would want to leave them with, what would that be?
Gosh, there's so many. But what I would really love every listener to believe, and I believe they do already because they're here and they're listening to your podcast, and I know many of them are repeat listeners, so they're really focused on their self-development already anyway, and they know that there is more within them than they're perhaps currently accessing. And it's to know that, you know, they do have the strength to continue on this journey for as long as they need and want to. Not as long as they should, or as someone else says they should, but, you know, as long as they actually need and want to within their own heart. And when they can discover what their own fertility journey can look like, and the routes and the paths that they feel comfortable going down, and that they can then commit to full out, you know, and see if it is going to be possible. I believe that every woman, every man, every couple can find that themselves. And it is through using techniques like EFT or mindfulness or anything else that feels right to them that they can discover, actually, this is my true path and this is right for me. I'm not doing this out of fear. I'm not doing it out of desperation, or, you know, it's actually true to me. This is what I want to do. So yeah, I'd encourage everyone to find it.
I love that so much. I couldn't think of a better note to end on. Thank you so much for being here, Sara. Please share with us, for the listeners who want to learn more about you, and also share about the Fertility EFT starter kit that you were talking about, so that we can kind of get our feet wet and learn more about EFT.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Yes, you can connect with me. The best places are on Facebook. That's where I seem to spend most of my life, as I know most of us do when I'm not with clients. I'm on Facebook connecting with people there. So you can find me on Facebook under Fertile Mindset as my page. But my private group is Fertile Mindset Support Hub, which is a lovely private group to come and connect with other people and with me as well. My website is fertilemindset.com. And if they would love to take up the free gift of my EFT starter kit, which will explain everything we've talked about in more detail and full tuition, then they just need to go to fertilemindset.com/fertility EFT, all one word, fertility EFT, and they can then download that whole stuff and get started. Let me know how you get on with it. I'd love to know.
Yes, well, I'll make sure to include those links in the show notes page for the listeners that are on the go. But once again, Sara, it's been a pleasure, and I could have kept talking to you because I still have more questions. So we might have to do this again in the future. Thank you so much for being here.
I'd love to. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/265. I hope that you enjoyed my interview with Sara. It was such a treat to have her on the show, and such a treat also to talk about EFT. This is the first time. It's so interesting, in over 200 episodes, this is the very first episode where we're talking about EFT tapping. And I was really just intrigued to find out the applications for fertility. And I would say my biggest takeaways were just on the different ways that it can be used. So there's that very practical stress reduction aspect of it, where if you're able to find ways to kind of transform those feelings of anxiety or sadness or whatever the case may be, then certainly way to reduce stress. And that's something that you can actually see kind of when you're charting your cycles and how that could play out in the physical sense. But I really appreciated how Sara spoke about how, tapping, especially when you've been experiencing fertility challenges and you're in that space of, it's just the way that she described it, in that space of I want to continue, but I don't want it to be at the expense of my relationships or at the expense of my finances or whatever the case may be. And those really, really difficult, stressful aspects of fertility challenges, and having tapping be a way to help you cope with that, to really help you to get through, so you can actually kind of get back to that calm space where you can just kind of think about those things a little bit differently, as opposed to feeling so overwhelmed. So I really appreciated that aspect of it, and just thinking about the different applications of something like tapping. And so I would encourage you to look into it more if this is something that's new to you and you've never heard it. I'm really fascinated by it, because I really did mean when I said that when you hear about it and you learn about what it is, it really sounds like, could this really work? It's just too simple. I mean, shouldn't getting through some of these emotions, shouldn't it be harder? One of the questions that I didn't get a chance to ask Sara on the podcast, but I did kind of sneak it in after, are there times when we actually want to hang on to our pain? Is it easier sometimes for us to really just relish in that? I mean, it's painful, when you're experiencing anxiety and depression, but especially if we've been experiencing that for a while, or if we've been in some sort of loop where we kind of keep coming back to that, even though it's an uncomfortable emotion, despite that discomfort, it might still be a familiar emotion. It might be more familiar to us to feel that way and to kind of stay in that emotion than it is to let it go and actually feel a different emotion, feel happiness, sad, lightness, and even just to feel neutral. And something like tapping, I would imagine, would really bring up those emotions, because in those moments when you kind of go through and do the technique and you can kind of feel the energy shift and you can feel those negative feelings kind of dissolve, then it really forces you to question, do I really want to let that go? And do I want to allow myself to feel neutral, to feel lighter, to feel happy, to allow myself to think about the situation differently and focus on a different aspect of it, to look at the positive aspects of it, or, what I can do to make myself happy, or to what changes I can make to just better handle the situation. So really fascinating topic, fascinating discussion around it. And I just wanted to share that with you, because I know I was like, Sara, I wanted to ask you another question, but I wanted to be respectful of time. Do you find that people still, they want to hang on to that pain? And yeah, so that might be a topic for another podcast in the future. And so thank you once again for taking some time out of your busy day to tune into the show and to hang out with us here at Fertility Friday. I appreciate all of you for sharing the show with your friends and for helping to spread the word about Fertility Friday. I see you out there tagging me on social media and also just sharing the episodes with your friends. So if you feel that this episode could be useful for somebody who you know, make sure to share it. And so the share link is fertilityfriday.com/265. And so with that, I hope you have a wonderful week or weekend whenever you are tuning into the show. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.